I stood in that courtroom and listened as my own son calmly told the judge I was confused, while my daughter wiped away tears that weren't real. They spoke about me like I was already gone, like my voice didn't matter anymore. But I remembered everything, every word, every lie, and in my purse, hidden beneath trembling hands, was something they didn't know existed, a recording. The one piece of truth that could destroy everything they built. I had stayed silent for years, but not today. If this story touches you, please like and subscribe. And tell me, what would you do if your own family tried to take everything from you? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. You're not alone in this. Before everything fell apart, before courtrooms, accusations, and whispered betrayals, my life was quiet, predictable. The kind of quiet that settles into your bones after years of raising a family, loving a husband, and building a home one careful decision at a time. My name is Blake Morrison. I'm 62 years old, and until recently, I believed I had done everything right. After my husband Thomas passed away 5 years ago, the house felt too large for just one person. It sat on a quiet street in Columbus, Ohio, a 2-story home with white siding, a wide front porch, and a maple tree in the yard that Thomas had planted the year our son was born. Every corner of that house held a memory. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the cinnamon rolls he used to make on Sunday mornings. His coat still hung in the hallway closet untouched. People told me I should sell it, downsize, move somewhere easier. But I couldn't. That house wasn't just a place. It was my life. At first, my children seemed to understand. Ryan, my son, lived in Chicago. He worked in finance, something high-pressure, high-paying, and as he liked to remind me, high responsibility. He didn't visit often, but when he did, he walked through the house like he was assessing it. His eyes lingered on the hardwood floors, the size of the lot, the aging roof. "Mom, this place is worth a lot now," he said once, standing by the window and glancing out at the yard. "You're sitting on a gold mine." I smiled at the time, thinking it was just practical concern. Ashley, my daughter, was different, or at least she seemed to be. She lived closer, only about 20 minutes away, and she visited every week. She brought groceries, helped with small repairs, and always asked how I was feeling. "You shouldn't be alone so much," she would say, her voice soft with concern. "I worry about you." At first, I was grateful. Truly. After Thomas died, the loneliness had been overwhelming. The nights were the worst. Silence pressed in from every direction, and sometimes I would sit in the living room with the television on just to hear another human voice. So when Ashley started coming by more often, I welcomed it. But looking back now, I can see the shift. The subtle changes that didn't feel like anything at the time, but meant everything. It started at the time, but meant everything. It started with small questions. "Mom, where do you keep your bank statements? Do you still manage all your bills yourself? Have you ever thought about consolidating your accounts?" It with small questions. "Mom, where do you keep your bank statements? Do you still manage all your bills yourself? Have you ever thought about consolidating your accounts?" They sounded harmless, responsible even. I answered without hesitation. "I've always handled things just fine." I told her once, laughing lightly. "Your father made sure of that." She smiled, but there was something behind it. Something I didn't quite catch then. Ryan's calls became more frequent too. Not long conversations, just quick check-ins. "Did you remember to pay the property taxes? Are you keeping track of your expenses? Have you noticed any memory lapses?" That last question made me pause. "Memory lapses," I repeated. "No." "Why would I?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Just asking," he said. "At your age, it's something to watch." At your age? I had heard that phrase before, of course, from doctors, from friends, from television commercials that suddenly seemed to be speaking directly to me. But hearing it from my own son felt different. Still, I brushed it off. I told myself they were just concerned, that they loved me, that this was what children did when their parents got older. But then things started to change in ways I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, I sat down at my desk to review my monthly statements. It was something I had done for decades, carefully, methodically. Numbers had always made sense to me. They were honest, predictable. But that day, something didn't add up. There was a withdrawal I didn't recognize. It wasn't a large amount, just a few $100s. But I knew my accounts. I knew every bill, every expense, every automatic payment. This didn't belong. I frowned, going through the pages again. Maybe I had forgotten. The thought came quickly, uninvited. I didn't like it. I checked my calendar, my receipts, my notes. Nothing. When Ashley came by later that evening, I mentioned it casually. Have you ever had a charge show up that you didn't remember making? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she set down her purse slowly, her expression shifting into something I couldn't quite read. That can happen sometimes, she said gently. You might have just forgotten, Mom. I don't think so. I replied a little more firmly than I intended. She walked over and placed a hand on my arm. It's okay, she said softly. These things happen. It doesn't mean anything, but it did mean something. I could feel it. A few days later, it happened again. Another small transaction, another unexplained entry. This time, I didn't mention it. Instead, I started paying closer attention. I watched what Ashley did when she came over. I noticed how she sometimes lingered near my desk, how she asked questions about passwords, about account access, about where I kept important documents. Ryan called again that week. Mama Ashley mentioned you were confused about your bank account, he said. I sat up straighter in my chair. I'm not confused, I said carefully. There were just a couple of charges I didn't recognize. That's exactly what I mean, he replied. You're forgetting things. I'm not forgetting. I insisted. There was that pause again. Mom, he said, his voice softer now, almost rehearsed. We're just worried about you. Worried, that word again. It started to feel less like concern and more like something else, something heavier, something that settled in my chest and refused to move. A week later, Ashley showed up with a folder. I thought we could go over some paperwork together, she said brightly, just to make things easier for you. What kind of paperwork? I asked. Oh, just some financial stuff. Nothing complicated. I thought we could go over some paperwork together, she said brightly, just to make things easier for you. What kind of paperwork? I asked. Oh, just some financial stuff. Nothing complicated. She opened the folder and began laying out documents on the table. Forms, statements, legal pages filled with small, dense text. I stared at them, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. I don't remember asking for this, I said. You didn't have to, she replied. I just thought it would help. Help. There it was again. I looked down at the papers, then back up at her. Something wasn't right. I could feel it now, clearer than before. The questions, the calls, the unexplained transactions, the sudden interest in my finances. It wasn't random. It wasn't concern. It was a pattern. And for the first time, a thought crossed my mind that I couldn't ignore. What if they weren't trying to help me? What if they were trying to take control? I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. But something inside me shifted that day. A quiet, steady awareness. The kind that doesn't fade once it appears. I began to watch more closely. Listen more carefully. Remember everything. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't going to stop. It was only the beginning. The first time Ryan said the words out loud, I felt something inside me go cold. "We just want to make sure everything's okay with your memory, Mom." He said it casually, like it was nothing, like he was asking if I'd scheduled a dentist appointment. But there was something in his tone, something measured, controlled, that made me sit a little straighter in my chair. We were on the phone. I remember standing by the kitchen sink, staring out at the backyard where the maple trees swayed gently in the wind. "My memory is fine," I said. There was a pause. Not confusion, not surprise. A pause. "Of course," he replied quickly. "I didn't mean anything by it. It's just Ashley mentioned a couple of things." My grip tightened on the phone. "What things?" "Oh, little stuff. Misplacing things. Forgetting conversations." I felt a flicker of irritation. "I haven't forgotten anything important," I said. "And I certainly haven't misplaced anything." Another pause. "Well," he said slowly, "it might be a good idea to get a baseline. Just a simple checkup. Nothing serious. A baseline." I had heard that word before, too. Doctors used it when they wanted something to compare future results to. It sounded harmless, sensible even, but something about the way Ryan said it made it feel strategic. "I don't need a test," I said firmly. "Mom," he replied, his voice softening, "this isn't about need. It's about peace of mind. For all of us. For all of us. Not for me. For them." "I'll think about it," I said finally, wanting to end the conversation. "That's all I ask," he said. But I knew even then that it wasn't. 2 days later, Ashley showed up at my door earlier than usual. She wasn't carrying groceries this time. She was holding her phone. "Mom, can we talk?" she asked, stepping inside before I could answer. Her tone was different, urgent, carefully gentle. I closed the door behind her, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. "What's wrong?" I asked. She sat down at the kitchen table and gestured for me to join her. "Nothing's wrong," she said quickly. "We just want to help." There it was again. Help. I sat across from her, folding my hands in my lap. "Ryan called me," she continued. "We both think it would be a good idea for you to see a doctor." I stared at her. "A doctor?" "Just for a memory evaluation," she said, her voice soft and reassuring. "It's very routine. Lots of people your age do it. My age." I felt a spark of anger this time. "I told Ryan I don't need that," I said. Ashley leaned forward slightly, her eyes searching my face. "Mom, please don't take this the wrong way," she said. "But we've both noticed things." "What things?" I asked again, sharper now. She hesitated. And for just a second, just a flicker, I saw something slip. Not concern. Calculation. "You forgot about that bank charge the other day?" she said finally. "You seemed really confused." "I wasn't confused," I replied. "I just didn't recognize it." "Exactly," she said gently. "That's what I mean." "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not what that means." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom," she said softly, "we're worried about you." I pulled my hand back. "I'm not," I said. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, uncomfortable. Ashley sat back in her chair, her expression shifting slightly. The softness didn't disappear, but it became practiced. "Okay," she said, "but would you at least consider it for me?" I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to refuse again, to stand my ground. But another part of me, quieter, more cautious, whispered something else. "If you refuse, they'll push harder." I could feel it. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a step, a planned step. And if I resisted too strongly, They would find another way. Fine, I said finally. I'll go. Once. Ashley's face brightened instantly. Thank you, she said, relief flooding her voice. You won't regret it. I promise. I nodded, but I didn't smile, because something about the way she said that didn't feel like reassurance. It felt like certainty. The appointment was scheduled for the following week. Ashley insisted on driving me. It's easier this way, she said. You don't have to worry about directions or parking. I knew how to get to the clinic. I had been there before, for routine checkups for Thomas's appointments when he was sick. But I didn't argue. I watched. I listened. I remembered. The clinic looked the same as it always had. Clean, quiet, faintly smelling of antiseptic and coffee. Dr. Kevin Schultz greeted us in the waiting room. He was a tall man in his early 50s with neatly combed hair and a calm, professional smile. Mrs. Morrison, he said, shaking my hand. It's good to see you again. You too, I replied. His grip was firm, confident, rehearsed. Why don't we head inside? He said, gesturing toward his office. Ashley stood up immediately. He'll come with you, she said. That won't be necessary? Dr. Schultz replied smoothly. I'd like to speak with your mother alone first. For a brief moment, something passed between them. Quick, subtle, but I saw it. Ashley hesitated, then smiled. Of course, she said. I'll be right outside. I followed Dr. Schultz into his office, my mind already turning. The room was warm with soft lighting and framed diplomas on the wall. A small desk sat in the corner, neatly organized with a computer and a stack of files. He motioned for me to sit. Now, he said, settling into his chair, your children mentioned some concerns about your memory. I met his gaze. What concerns? I asked. He glanced down at a file on his desk. Some forgetfulness, he said. Confusion about recent events. Financial inconsistencies. I felt my chest tighten. I'm not confused, I said calmly, and I manage my finances just fine. He nodded as if he had expected that response. Of course, he said, and that's exactly what we're here to assess. Assess. Another word that sounded harmless, but wasn't. He began asking questions. Simple ones at first. The date, the time, the name of the current president. Then more complex ones. Lists of words to remember, numbers to repeat backward, scenarios to interpret. I answered them all. Carefully, clearly. Watching him as much as he watched me. Every time I spoke, he made a note. Every time I paused, even for a second, his pen moved. I could feel it happening, not the test itself, but something underneath it, a narrative being built, piece by piece. When we were finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. Well, he said you did quite well on several portions. Several portions. Not all. I didn't miss that. But I asked. He smiled politely. But there are a few areas of concern, he said. Nothing definitive, of course, just indicators. Indicators. I felt that cold sensation again. What kind of indicators? I asked. He hesitated, and in that hesitation I knew. This wasn't just a test, it was a step, just like everything else. Well, he said finally, early signs of cognitive decline can be subtle. There it was. Not a diagnosis, not yet, but something close enough to use. I nodded slowly as if I understood, as if I accepted it, but inside something shifted again, stronger this time, clearer. This wasn't about my health. It wasn't about my memory. It was about control. and they were building their case, one careful step at a time. The word intervention sounded almost gentle when Ashley first said it. "We just want to sit down and talk, Mom," she told me over the phone. "Nothing serious, just the three of us. Just the three of us." I should have known better. They came over on a Sunday afternoon, Ryan having flown in from Chicago that morning, Ashley arriving early to help set things up, though I hadn't asked her to. When I walked into the living room, both of them were already seated side by side like they had rehearsed this moment. There were papers on the coffee table, neatly stacked, organized, prepared. Something tightened in my chest. "What's all this?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. Ryan stood up immediately, offering me a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom, have a seat," he said. "We just want to talk." I didn't sit right away. I looked at both of them instead. Ashley's expression was soft concerned, almost overly so. Ryan's was controlled professional, like he was about to present a case in a boardroom. "I'm standing just fine," I said. Ashley let out a small sigh. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder. There it was again, that subtle shift in language, as if something had already been decided and I was the only one who hadn't agreed to it yet. Slowly, I sat down in the armchair across from them. Ryan glanced at Ashley and she gave him a barely noticeable nod. Then he began. "We've been worried about you," he said. "Of course. I'm fine," I replied. He ignored that. "We've noticed changes," he continued. "Small things at first. Forgetfulness, confusion, financial mistakes." "There haven't been any financial mistakes," I said, my voice sharper now. Ashley leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "Mom, please," she said softly. "We're not trying to accuse you of anything." It felt exactly like an accusation. Ryan picked up a sheet of paper from the table. "This is your bank statement from last month," he said. "There are multiple charges you couldn't explain." "I told you," I said, my heart beginning to pound. "I didn't recognize them." "That doesn't mean I made a mistake. It means you don't remember making them," he corrected calmly. "No," I said, shaking my head. "It means I didn't make them." Silence fell over the room, heavy, pressing. Ryan set the paper down carefully. He said, his tone shifting slightly. "This isn't about being right or wrong. It's about your safety." "My safety," I repeated. Ashley nodded quickly. "Yes," she said. "What if something serious happens? What if you forget to pay a bill? Or you sign something you don't understand?" "I would never." "You already have," Ryan interrupted. The words hit me like a slap. "I have not," I said, my voice rising despite myself. Ashley flinched slightly as if my reaction proved something. "Mom," she said gently, "this is exactly what we're talking about. You're getting defensive because you're scared." I stared at her. Scared? No. I wasn't scared. I was angry, and suddenly, very, very clear. "This isn't about me being scared," I said slowly. "This is about you two deciding something without me." I wasn't scared. I was angry, and suddenly very, very clear. "This isn't about me being scared," I said slowly. "This is about you two deciding something without me." Ryan leaned back slightly, his expression tightening. "We're not deciding anything," he said. "We're trying to help you make the right choice." "And what choice is that?" I asked. Ashley reached for the stack of papers and slid them toward me. "We want you to sign a financial power of attorney," she said. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. I looked down at the documents, my stomach turning. "No," I said immediately. Ryan exhaled slowly as if he had expected that. "Mom." No, I repeated more firmly this time. I'm not signing anything. Ashley's expression shifted. The softness faded just a fraction. Why not, she asked. Because I don't need it, I said. I'm perfectly capable of handling my own finances. Ryan leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. You think you are? He said. The words were quiet, controlled, and more insulting than anything he had said so far. I know I am, I replied. Another silence, this one colder, sharper. Ashley glanced at Ryan again, and something passed between them, something quick and unspoken but unmistakable. Then Ryan stood up. Okay, he said, his voice suddenly calm again. If you're not willing to do this voluntarily, then we'll have to consider other options. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? I asked. He met my gaze directly. It means we may need to pursue legal guardianship, he said. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Guardianship, I repeated. Ashley spoke quickly, as if trying to soften the blow. It is just a legal way to make sure you're protected, she said. It doesn't mean you lose everything. It just means someone helps you make decisions. Someone, not me. I don't need protection, I said, my voice trembling now. Not with fear, but with disbelief. I need my children to trust me. Ryan's expression didn't change. This isn't about trust, he said. It's about reality. Reality. The word echoed in my mind, as if they had already rewritten it. You're not thinking clearly, Ashley added softly. There it was. The line. The one they had been building toward all along. I looked at both of them, really looked, and for the first time, I saw it. Not concern, not worry, but something colder, something calculated. This wasn't a conversation. It was a strategy. You've already decided this, haven't you? I said quietly. Neither of them answered. They didn't have to. I'm your mother, I continued, my voice steadying. I raised you. I took care of you. And now you're sitting here trying to convince me I can't take care of myself. Ashley's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't reach her voice. We're doing this because we love you, she said. No, I replied. I shook my head slowly. You're doing this because you want control. The words hung in the air, sharp, unavoidable. Ryan's jaw tightened. That's not fair, he said. Isn't it? I asked. No one spoke. The silence stretched. Then Ryan picked up the papers again and stacked them neatly. Think about it, he said, because if you don't sign, we will move forward with the guardianship process. There was no anger in his voice, no hesitation, just certainty. Ashley stood up slowly, smoothing her blouse. We don't want it to come to that, she said, but we will do what's necessary. Necessary. They moved toward the door together. A united front, as if this had been decided long before they walked into my house. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed felt different from before. Heavier, colder, final. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where they had been. Guardianship. The word echoed in my mind. It wasn't just a threat. It was a plan. And suddenly, everything made sense. The doctor's visit, the bank questions, the subtle suggestions that I was forgetting things. They weren't reacting to a problem. They were creating one, piece by piece, step by step. And I had walked right into it. But as I sat there, something else began to rise inside me. Not fear, not confusion, Something stronger. Clarity. If they were building a case against me, then I needed to start building one of my own. Because one thing was certain now. This wasn't going to stop. And if I stayed silent, I would lose everything. The moment the door closed behind them, I didn't move. I sat in that same chair, staring at the papers they had left behind on the table. Those carefully arranged documents that were supposed to take my life out of my hands and place it neatly into theirs. Guardianship. The word echoed louder now, clearer, heavier. It wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a threat. And for the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to admit something I had been resisting. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't concern. This was a plan. A deliberate, calculated plan to take control of everything I owned and everything I was. I stood up slowly and walked toward the table. My fingers hovered over the documents before finally touching them. Financial power of attorney. Authorization of asset oversight. Legal language wrapped in polite phrases. But I understood exactly what it meant. If I signed those papers, I would lose my independence. If I refused, they would take it anyway. I gathered the documents into a stack and placed them back in the folder Ashley had brought. My hands were steady now. Too steady, because something inside me had shifted. Again. Not fear. Not even anger this time. Awareness. The kind that sharpens your senses. That makes every detail stand out in a way it didn't before. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space where Thomas used to sit every night reading his newspaper. "What would you do?" I whispered softly. The silence answered me, but not in the way I expected, because deep down I already knew. I needed to stop reacting and start watching, really watching. That evening, I made a decision that felt small at the time, but would change everything that came after. I drove to a store on the other side of town. Not the one I usually went to. Not anywhere Ashley might casually stop by. I walked through the aisles slowly, my heart beating just a little faster than usual until I found what I was looking for. A small recording device. Simple, discreet. Easy to use. I held it in my hand for a long moment. I had never done anything like this before, never felt the need to. But nothing about my life was normal anymore. I paid in cash. Another small decision. And when I walked out of that store, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. Not much, but enough. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, turning the device over in my hands, learning how it worked. There was a small button on the side, a blinking red light when it was active. Enough storage for hours of audio, more than enough. I placed it in the drawer beside my desk, and then I waited. The next few days, I didn't change anything. That was important. I answered Ryan's calls the same way I always had. I let Ashley come by as often as she wanted. I nodded when they spoke about next steps and making things easier. I played the part they had already written for me. The confused mother, the vulnerable woman, the one who needed help. But inside, I was paying attention. Every word, every glance, every pause. Ashley came by 2 days later carrying a grocery bag and that same carefully measured concern on her face. "How are you feeling today?" she asked as she set the bag on the counter. "Fine," I said, just like always. She studied me for a moment. "You seem tired," she said. "I didn't sleep well," I replied. That part at least was true. She nodded slowly as if confirming something in her mind. "We should probably follow up with Dr. Schultz," she said, just to be safe. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked over to the counter and began unpacking the groceries. Maybe, I said after a moment. Maybe. Not yes, not no. Just enough to keep her comfortable. As she moved around the kitchen, I quietly opened the drawer and slipped the recording device into the pocket of my sweater. My fingers trembled slightly as I pressed the button. A faint click, a silent shift. It had begun. We sat down at the table together, just like we had countless times before. Ashley poured herself a glass of water, her movements relaxed, familiar. But there was something different now. Not in her. In me. Because for the first time, I wasn't just part of the conversation. I was observing it. So, she said, leaning back in her chair, Ryan and I were talking. Of course, they weren't I were talking. Of course they were. We think it might be best to move things along, she continued. Move what along, I asked. The guardianship process, she said gently. It's just safer this way. Safer. I nodded slowly, as if considering it. And what happens then? I asked. She smiled, relieved that I wasn't resisting. Well, she said we'd be able to help manage your finances. Make sure everything is handled properly. Take some of the stress off your shoulders. My shoulders aren't stressed, I said calmly. She laughed softly. You don't have to pretend with me, Mom. Pretend. The word lingered in the air. I'm not pretending, I said. Her smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes shifted. Just slightly. Of course, she said. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she leaned forward, lowering her voice just a bit. Between us, she said, Ryan's really pushing for this. I tilted my head slightly. Why, I asked. She hesitated. Just for a second. Then she shrugged lightly. He just thinks it's the best solution, she said. I watched her carefully. Solution to what I asked. This time, the hesitation was longer. And in that hesitation, something cracked. Hess worried about the house, she said finally. The house. Of course. What about it? I asked. She glanced toward the window as if making sure no one else could hear, even though we were alone. It's just a lot to maintain, she said, and it's worth a lot right now. It might make sense to sell it. There it was. Not concern, not safety, value, money. And what would happen to the money, I asked quietly. She smiled again. We'd make sure it's invested properly, she said. For your care. Your care. I nodded slowly. And who decides that? I asked. She met my eyes. We would, she said. Not you. We. The word settled heavily between us. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. This was no longer subtle, no longer hidden behind gentle suggestions and careful language. This was the truth, and it was all being recorded. Every word, every intention, every piece of the plan they thought I didn't understand. Ashley stood up after a few minutes, brushing imaginary crumbs from the table. Just think about it, she said. We're only trying to do what's best for you. I smiled faintly. I know, I said, and for the first time since this all began, I wasn't lying to myself anymore. Because now I finally understood something they didn't. They thought they were building a case against me, but they had no idea. I had already started building one against them. I didn't listen to the recording right away. That might sound strange considering how important it was, but something in me hesitated, not out of fear, but out of instinct. I knew that once I heard it clearly, once I allowed myself to fully absorb what my own children were saying, behind closed doors, there would be no going back. No more doubt. No more denial. Only truth. And truth, I was beginning to understand, could be heavier than lies. For 2 days, the device stayed in my drawer. For 2 days, I moved through my house like everything was normal, watering the plants, folding laundry, watching television in the evenings. But underneath that routine, something else was happening. I was remembering every conversation, every look, every moment that hadn't felt quite right. And the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. On the 3rd night, I finally sat down at the kitchen table, took the device out of the drawer, and pressed play. At first, all I heard was the soft hum of the room, the faint clinking of dishes, the rustle of movement. Then, Ashley's voice. Clear, calm, controlled. We need to move faster. My breath caught. There was a pause, followed by Ryan's voice. I know, he said, but we can't push too hard too soon. It has to look natural. Natural. The word hit me like ice water. She's already suspicious, Ashley replied. You saw her face the other day. She's always been like that, Ryan said, stubborn, defensive. I gripped the edge of the table, my fingers tightening. That's not the problem, Ashley said. The problem is timing. If we wait too long, we lose leverage. Leverage. I closed my eyes. They weren't even trying to hide it. Dr. Schultz already gave us what we needed, Ryan continued. It's not a diagnosis, but it's enough to start the process. My stomach dropped. Enough. Enough to start. So what's the plan? Ashley asked. There was a brief silence, then Ryan spoke again. Lower this time, more deliberate. We file for guardianship, he said. Use the evaluation, the financial inconsistencies, her resistance. It all fits. Fits. Like a story they had already written. And the house? Ashley asked quietly. Another pause. Then, we sell it, Ryan said. Just like that. No hesitation. No emotion. We can't keep it up, he continued. It's too much maintenance, and the market's high right now. It's the smart move. Smart. For them. And Mom? Ashley asked. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear the next words. We move her into assisted living, Ryan said. Somewhere decent. Nothing too expensive. Nothing too expensive. I pressed my hand over my mouth. She won't like that, Ashley said. Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh. She doesn't have to like it, he replied. She just has to be declared incapable of stopping it. The words echoed in my mind. Declared incapable. Not actually incapable. Declared. A decision. A label. A strategy. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed felt deafening. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the device in my hand. My children. My own children. I had carried them, raised them, loved them through every stage of their lives. And now they were sitting in my kitchen, calmly discussing how to erase me from my own life. I thought I would cry. I thought the weight of it would break something inside me. But it didn't. Instead, something else happened. Something colder. Something sharper. Clarity. Not the kind that comes with understanding, the kind that comes with certainty. There was no misunderstanding here, no confusion, no maybe they didn't mean it that way. They meant every word. And now so did I. I pressed play again. This time, I listened to the entire recording. Every word, every pause, every carefully chosen phrase. By the time it ended, I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was focused, because now I finally had something real. Not suspicion, not instinct. Proof. The next morning, I called Harold Bennett. It had been years since we last spoke. He had been my husband's attorney, someone Thomas trusted completely. After his death, I hadn't needed legal help, and the connection had faded. But I remembered him, and more importantly, I remembered that he had always been honest. Harold Bennett's office, a voice answered. "Hello?" I said, steadying myself. "My name is Blake Morrison. I was hoping to speak with Mr. Bennett." There was a brief pause. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am?" "No," I said. "But I believe he knew my husband, Thomas Morrison." Another pause. Longer this time. "One moment, please." The line went quiet. Then Blake, a familiar voice, said. I closed my eyes for just a second. "Hello, Harold." "Well, Ilby," he said softly. "It's been a long time. How are you?" I hesitated. How was I? That question felt almost impossible to answer now. "I need your help," I said instead. The tone of his voice changed immediately. "Tell me what's going on." I didn't tell him everything. Not yet. But I told him enough. About the doctor's visit. The guardians, about the doctor's visit. The guardian's hip threat. The pressure to sign over control. And finally the recording. There was silence on the other end of the line when I finished. Then he spoke. "Do you still have that recording?" he asked. "Yes." Good hip threat. The pressure to sign over control. And finally, the recording. There was silence on the other end of the line when I finished. Then he spoke. "Do you still have that recording?" he asked. "Yes." "Good," he said. "Don't share it with anyone else." "Not yet." My grip tightened on the phone. "Is it enough?" I asked. Another pause. "It might be," he said carefully. "But we need to do this the right way." "The right way? Can you come into my office?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Today I glanced at the clock. "Yes." "Good," he said. "Bring everything you have. Everything." I hung up the phone slowly. Then I sat there for a moment, letting the reality of it settle in. This was no longer just something happening to me. This was something I was stepping into. A fight. A real one. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't on the defensive anymore. I stood up, walked to my bedroom, and opened the small safe in my closet. Inside were the things that mattered. Financial records, old documents, important papers I had kept organized for years. I gathered them carefully, placing them into a folder. Then I picked up the recording device and held it in my hand. It looked so small, so ordinary, but it carried something powerful enough to change everything. As I slipped it into my purse, one thought settled clearly in my mind. They believed I was weak. They believed I was confused. They believed I would stay silent. They were wrong. Because now I wasn't just listening anymore. I was preparing to be heard. Harold Bennett's office hadn't changed much. The same dark wood furniture. The same neatly arranged bookshelves lined with legal volumes that looked like they had been there for decades. Even the faint scent of old paper and polished wood felt familiar, comforting in a way I hadn't expected. But I wasn't the same woman who had last walked through that door. 5 years ago, I had come here with Thomas holding his hand, trusting that the man beside me and the man across the desk would always protect what we had built together. Now, I was here alone. And I was no longer asking for protection. I was asking for justice. Harold stood when I entered, his expression softening the moment he saw me. "Blake." Now I was here alone, and I was no longer asking for protection. I was asking for justice. Harold stood when I entered, his expression softening the moment he saw me. "Blake," he said warmly, walking around his desk. "It's good to see you, though. I wish it were under better circumstances." "So do I replied. He gestured for me to sit, and I placed my bag carefully on the chair beside me. "You said you had something important." He continued, his tone shifting into something more focused. "I do." My hands didn't shake this time as I reached into my purse and took out the recording device. "This," I said, placing it gently on his desk, "might change everything." He looked at it for a moment, then back at me. "Do you mind if I listen?" he asked. I shook my head. "No." He pressed play. The room filled with the same voices I had already heard, the same calm, calculated conversation between Ryan and Ashley. But hearing it here in this office, with someone else listening, it felt different. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react outwardly. But I watched him carefully. Every small shift in his expression, every slight tightening of his jaw. By the time the recording ended, the room felt heavier. He leaned back slowly in his chair, folding his hands together. "Well," he said quietly, "that's significant." Significant. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "Is it enough?" I asked again. This time, his answer was more certain. "It's a very strong piece of evidence," he said, "but we need to be careful about how we use it." I frowned slightly. "Careful how?" He leaned forward. "Recordings can be powerful," he explained, "but their admissibility depends on how they were obtained, where they were recorded, and whether all parties were aware." My heart sank just a little. "I recorded it in my own home," I said quickly. "Without telling them." He nodded slowly. "Ohio is a one-party consent state," he said, "which means as long as you are part of the conversation, it's generally legal to record it." Relief washed over me, but only briefly. But he continued, "That doesn't automatically mean it will be accepted without challenge. Their attorney may argue context, intent, or authenticity." "So what do we do?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "We build around it. Around it, not just rely on it. That recording gives us direction," he said. "Now we need to support it with documentation." I reached for the folder I had brought and slid it across the desk. "I have financial records," I said. "Statements, documents, things that didn't feel right." He opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. His eyes moved quickly, scanning, assessing. After a few moments, he stopped. "This," he said, tapping one of the documents, "is a problem." I leaned forward. "What is it?" "A signature," he said. "It doesn't match your known handwriting." My stomach tightened. "I didn't sign that," I said. He nodded. "I believe you." He flipped to another page. "And this one," he added, "is even more concerning." "What is it?" "A transfer authorization," he said. "It appears to move funds from one of your accounts to another under joint control." "Joint control," I repeated. "With your daughter," he confirmed. "Ashley." I felt a cold wave wash over me. "I never approved that," I said. "I didn't think you did," he replied. He leaned back again, his expression now more serious than before. "Blake," he said, "this is no longer just about guardianship." I stared at him. "What do you mean? This could involve financial fraud?" he said. "Possibly forgery." The words hit harder than I expected. Fraud. Forgery. These weren't just family issues anymore. These were crimes. "They're my children," I said quietly. He didn't respond right away. "I know," he said finally, "and that makes this harder, but it doesn't change the facts." Facts. That word again. So simple, so final. "What happens next?" I asked. He folded his hands again, his tone measured. "We prepare," he said, "because if they're moving forward with a guardianship petition, we need to be ready to respond. Respond how we challenge it," he said, directly. My heart began to beat faster again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else. Anticipation. "You're not the one on trial here," he continued. "They are. We just need to make that clear." For the first time since all of this began, I felt something close to hope. Real hope. Not the fragile kind that disappears at the first sign of trouble. The kind that stands on something solid. Evidence. Truth. "And the recording?" I asked. He looked at the device again. "We use it at the right moment," he said. "Not too early. Not too late." "Why not now?" I asked. "Because right now," he said, "they think they're in control." He paused. "And that's exactly where we want them." I understood immediately. If we showed our hand too soon, they would adapt. They would change their story, cover their tracks. But if we waited, they'll expose more of themselves, I said softly. He smiled. Exactly. A silence settled between us, but this one felt different from the others I had experienced lately. Not heavy, not suffocating, focused, controlled. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to what was happening. I was part of what was coming next. "There's one more thing," Harold said. I looked up. "You need to be very careful," he continued. "If they suspect you're building a case, they may escalate. Escalate how I asked. Faster legal action," he said. "More aggressive claims. Possibly even attempts to isolate you. Isolate me." The words sent a small chill through me, but it didn't shake me the way it might have before. "Let them try," I said. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're stronger than they think," he said. I didn't respond, because strength wasn't something I felt. Not yet. But I was becoming something else. Something sharper, more aware, more deliberate. And as I gathered my things and stood to leave, one thought settled clearly in my mind. They believed they had already won. They believed I was too weak to fight back. They believed I would stay quiet just like I always had. But now they were walking straight into something they didn't even see. And when the moment came, when the truth finally stepped into that courtroom, it wouldn't just defend me, it would expose them. The envelope arrived 3 days later. It was thicker than a normal letter, the kind that carried weight before you even opened it. Official, formal, final in a way that made your hands pause just slightly before breaking the seal. I knew what it was before I read a single word. Guardianship. Ryan hadn't been bluffing. I stood in my kitchen, the late afternoon light stretching across the floor, and opened it slowly. The paper inside was crisp, clinical, and written in the kind of language that stripped emotion from everything it described. Petition for guardianship of an incapacitated adult. Incapacitated. The words settled heavily in my chest. I read every line. Ryan Morrison, petitioner. Ashley Morrison, supporting statement. Dr. Kevin Schultz, medical evaluation attached. It was all there. Every step they had been building. Every careful move. Documented. Structured. Presented as concern. Presented as necessity. Presented as truth. Except it wasn't. I set the papers down on the counter, my fingers pressing flat against the surface to steady myself. They had done it. They had officially taken the first legal step to remove me from my own life, and for a brief moment, a very brief moment, I felt it. That wave, the one they were counting on. Fear, doubt, the urge to give in to sign the papers they had offered before, to make it all stop before it got worse. But it passed, quickly, because something else rose up in its place. Resolve. I picked up the phone and called Harold. They filed, I said the moment he answered. I expected they might, he replied calmly. When's the hearing? I glanced down at the document. 2 weeks, I said. Good, he said. Good. The word surprised me. That gives us time, he continued. Time, for preparation, for strategy, for truth. I want you to come in tomorrow, he said. We need to go over everything in detail. I'll be there, I replied. When I hung up, I didn't sit down. I didn't let myself freeze. Instead, I moved. That was the difference now. Before I had been reacting. Now I was acting. I walked through the house looking at everything with new eyes. The living room where we had shared holidays. The hallway lined with family photos. The kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals. They wanted to take this from me. Not because I couldn't manage it, but because they could. That thought settled something deep inside me. This wasn't just about property. It wasn't even just about control. It was about erasing me, and I wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, I arrived at Harold's office earlier than scheduled. He was already there, a stack of documents spread across his desk. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I did. He handed me a copy of the petition. I've reviewed everything, he said. Their case is structured. That word again. They're using 3 main arguments, he continued. Medical evaluation, financial mismanagement, and behavioral resistance. Behavioral resistance, I repeated. He nodded. Your refusal to cooperate, he said. They're framing it as further evidence of cognitive decline. I let out a small, incredulous breath. So defending myself is proof that I'm incapable? I asked. In their narrative, yes, he said. Narrative. That's exactly what it was. A story. Carefully written. Carefully presented. But narratives can be challenged, he added. How? I asked. He leaned forward slightly. With facts, he said. With consistency. And with timing. Timing. I knew what he meant. The recording, I said. He nodded. Not yet, he replied. First, we let them present their case. My stomach tightened. Let them, I asked. Yes, he said. Because the more they say under oath, the more they commit to a version of events. And once they committed, they can't take it back. I finished. Exactly. A quiet silence settled between us as I absorbed that. This wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about letting them prove themselves wrong. Publicly. Legally. Irreversibly. There's something else, Harold said. I looked up. We need to prepare you, he continued. They're going to question you, test you, try to make you appear confused. I straightened slightly. I'm not confused, I said. I know that, he replied, but we need to make sure the court knows it too. He slid a notepad toward me. We're going to practice, he said. Practice? I hadn't expected that, but as we began, I understood why. He asked me questions, simple ones, dates, names, events. Then more complex ones, financial details, timelines, conversations. Each time, I answered clearly, carefully, deliberately. He nodded after each response, occasionally making notes. "You're doing well," he said after a while. "I'm just telling the truth," I replied. "That's exactly what we need," he said. Truth. It sounded simple, but in that moment I realized something important. Truth alone wasn't enough. It had to be presented, structured, understood, because lies, when told well enough, could sound just as convincing. Maybe even more so. We spent hours going through everything: the financial records, the forged signatures, the timeline of events. By the time I left his office, I wasn't just prepared. I was ready. 2 days later, Ryan called. I almost didn't answer. But then I remembered what Harold had said. Let them speak. So I picked up. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice unusually calm. "Ryan," I replied. "I assume you received the paperwork," he continued. "I did." There was a brief pause. "We're doing this for your own good," he said. The same line, the same script. I almost smiled. "I understand," I said evenly. He seemed surprised by that. "You do?" he asked. "Yes," I replied. "I understand exactly what you're doing." Another pause, longer this time. "Well," he said finally, "then I hope you'll cooperate." I looked out the window at the maple tree Thomas had planted all those years ago. "I will," I said, "but not in the way you expect." I didn't say that part out loud. I didn't need to, because for the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid of what was coming. I was waiting for it. The courtroom. The testimony. The moment when everything they had built would be tested under real light. And when that moment came, they would have no idea what was waiting for them. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just in temperature, but in feeling. Everything about it was precise, controlled, quiet in a way that made every small sound feel louder than it should be. The shuffle of papers, the echo of footsteps, the soft clearing of a throat. I sat beside Harold at the long wooden table, my hands folded neatly in front of me. Still, steady, prepared. Across the room, Ryan and Ashley sat together. They didn't look at me at first. That more than anything told me how much had changed. There was a time when my children would search for me the moment they entered a room. A glance, a smile, something small that said, "I see you." Now nothing. Just distance. Just strategy. Ryan leaned slightly toward his attorney, a man in a dark suit with a sharp expression and a voice I hadn't yet heard but already didn't trust. Ashley sat beside him, her posture straight, her face composed, but her hands betrayed her. They were clasped tightly together in her lap. Nervous, not guilty, not yet, but nervous. The bailiff called the room to order, and a few moments later, the judge entered. Judge Eleanor Whitaker. A woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back neatly and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She took her seat and began reviewing the case. "Petition for guardianship," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Filed by Ryan Morrison and supported by Ashley Morrison concerning Blake Morrison." Hearing my name spoken like that, formal detached, felt strange, as if I were already something distant, something to be evaluated, but I sat straighter. Because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't their courtroom. "Not anymore," counsel the judge said, looking toward Ryan's attorney. "You may proceed." The man stood smoothly. "Your Honor," he began, "we are here today because the petitioner and his sister have grave concerns about their mother's ability to manage her own affairs." Grave concerns. The words hung in the air. We will demonstrate, he continued, that Mrs. Morrison has shown clear signs of cognitive decline, including memory lapses, confusion regarding financial matters, and an increasing inability to make sound decisions in her own best interest. Each sentence was delivered with precision, confidence, rehearsed. I didn't react. I didn't interrupt. I simply listened. Because Harold had told me to. Let them build their story. The attorney called his first witness, Ryan. My son stood and walked to the stand, his movements calm, deliberate. He raised his hand, swore the oath, and sat down. For a moment, he glanced in my direction. Our eyes met, and I saw something there. Not guilt, not regret, conviction. He believed this, or at least he had convinced himself he did. Mr. Morrison, the attorney began, can you explain why you filed this petition? Ryan nodded slightly. Yes, he said. I'm concerned about my mother's well-being. Of course. In what way, the attorney asked. She's been forgetting things, he said. Important things. Conversations, financial decisions. I felt a flicker of irritation, but I kept it contained. And how has that affected her ability to manage her affairs? The attorney continued. Ryan took a breath. She's made questionable financial choices, he said. Charges she couldn't explain, transactions that didn't make sense. And how has that affected her ability to manage her affairs? The attorney continued. Ryan took a breath. She's made questionable financial choices, he said. Charges she couldn't explain. Transactions that didn't make sense. Didn't make sense. To him. And how has she responded when you tried to help? The attorney asked. Ryan hesitated. Then, she's been resistant, he said. Defensive, unwilling to acknowledge the problem. I almost smiled, because every word he said was fitting perfectly into the narrative they had prepared. Exactly as Harold had predicted. Do you believe your mother is capable of making sound decisions for herself? The attorney asked. Ryan paused again, this time longer, and for just a second, something flickered in his expression. Uncertainty. Then it disappeared. No, he said. The word landed hard, clear, final. Across the room, Ashley looked down at her hands. The attorney nodded. And no further questions. Harold stood. His movements were slower, more deliberate, measured. Mr. Morrison, he said, his voice calm, almost conversational. You mentioned financial inconsistencies. Can you give an example? Ryan nodded. There were charges on her account she couldn't explain, he said. Couldn't explain, Harold repeated. Or didn't recognize, Ryan frowned slightly. I suppose both. Did you verify whether those charges were legitimate? Harold asked. Ryan hesitated. I assumed. Did you verify? Harold repeated gently but firmly. No, Ryan admitted. A small pause. And the transactions you mentioned, Harold continued. Are you aware of any that were later identified as unauthorized? Ryan's expression tightened. I don't know, he said. You don't know? Harold repeated. The silence that followed was subtle, but important. And when your mother expressed disagreement with your concerns, Harold added, you described her as defensive. Is it possible she was simply disagreeing? Ryan shifted slightly in his seat. I suppose that's one way to look at it, he said. Thank you, Harold replied. No further questions. Ryan stepped down from the stand. He didn't look at me this time. Ashley was next. She walked to the stand with slower steps, her composure slightly less steady now. After taking the oath, she sat down, her hands still clasped tightly. "Miss Morrison," the attorney began, "can you describe your observations of your mother's condition?" Ashley swallowed slightly. "She's different," she said. "More forgetful, more confused." "Can you give an example?" he asked. Ashley nodded. "She didn't recognize charges on her account," she said. "And she's been making decisions that don't make sense. The same words, the same script." "And how has she responded when you tried to help?" he asked. Ashley hesitated. "Then she gets upset," she said, defensive, like she doesn't understand what's happening. I watched her carefully. Every word, every pause, every shift in tone, because now I could see it clearly. Not just what she was saying, but how she was saying it. Careful, measured, almost rehearsed. "And do you believe your mother is capable of managing her own affairs?" the attorney asked. Ashley's eyes flickered toward me for just a second. Then she looked back at him. "I don't think so," she said softly. The courtroom fell into a quiet stillness. Their case, their narrative, fully presented, exactly as planned, exactly as rehearsed. Harold remained seated, calm, patient, waiting, because now it was almost time, and they still had no idea what they had just committed to under oath. The shift in the courtroom was almost invisible. If you weren't paying attention, you might have missed it entirely. But I didn't miss it, because I was watching, listening, waiting. Harold remained seated for a moment after Ashley stepped down from the stand. He let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of their testimony to settle into the room. Then slowly he stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm, measured. The defense would like to call Blake Morrison to the stand. "My name," spoken with intention this time, not as a subject, but as a voice. I stood carefully aware of every movement, every step, as I walked to the witness stand. The wood beneath my hand felt solid as I steadied myself and took the oath. "I swear," I said, and I meant it. Not just the legal oath, but something deeper. I sat down and looked forward, not at Ryan, not at Ashley, but at the judge, because that was where the truth needed to go. Directly, clearly, without distraction. Harold approached slowly. "Mrs. Morrison," he began, "how long have you lived in your current home?" 32 years, I replied. "And during that time, have you managed your own financial affairs?" "Yes," I said. "Entirely. Have you ever been declared legally incapacitated?" "No." "Have you ever required a financial guardian?" "No." He nodded. "And prior to these recent events, had anyone expressed concern about your cognitive ability?" "No." Each answer was simple, direct, unshaken. Harold let a small pause settle between us before continuing. "Can you describe the situation regarding the charges your children referenced?" he asked. I nodded. "There were transactions on my account that I did not recognize." Harold let a small pause settle between us before continuing. "Can you describe the situation regarding the charges your children referenced?" he asked. I nodded. "There were transactions on my account that I did not recognize," I said. "That is true." A slight stir moved through the courtroom. "But not recognizing a charge," I continued, "is not the same as making a mistake. It is a reason to investigate." Harold nodded slightly. "Did you investigate?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And I discovered that some of those charges were unauthorized." "Unauthorized by whom?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I replied. But I do know they were not made by me. The judge leaned forward slightly. I could feel her attention sharpening. Harold took a step closer. Mrs. Morrison, he said, have you reviewed your financial documents recently? Yes. And did you find anything unusual? Yes. What did you find? I took a breath. Documents that appear to have been signed in my name but were not signed by me. A murmur rippled through the room. Ryan shifted in his seat. Ashley's hands tightened again. Harold didn't rush. He let that moment breathe. Your Honor, he said, turning slightly toward the bench. The defense would like to submit financial documents into evidence. Proceed, Judge Whitaker said. The documents were handed over, carefully, deliberately. I watched as the judge examined them, her expression unreadable but focused. Mrs. Morrison Harold continued. How would you describe your current mental state? The question hung in the air. This was the moment. The one they had been building toward. The one they expected me to fail. I met the judge's eyes. I am clear, I said. Not defensive, not emotional, just certain. I understand my finances, I continued. I understand the situation I am in, and I understand what is being attempted here. Harold nodded once. Thank you, he said softly. He turned slightly. No further questions. Ryan's attorney stood immediately. Sharp, quick, ready. Mrs. Morrison, he began. You've stated that you are clear and capable. Is that correct? Yes. And yet, he continued, you failed to recognize multiple charges on your account. I recognized that they were unfamiliar, I replied, which is why I investigated them. He tilted his head slightly. Or perhaps he said, you simply forgot making them. No, I said calmly. I did not. He took a step closer. You've also mentioned documents that you claim were not signed by you. Do you have proof of that? Yes, I said. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but it was brief. And where is this proof, he asked. I glanced at Harold. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Those documents have been submitted, I said. The attorney turned slightly toward the judge, then back to me. Mrs. Morrison? He said, his tone sharpening just slightly. Isn't it possible that your memory is failing and that these inconsistencies are the result of your own confusion? There it was. The question. The trap. I didn't rush my answer. I didn't react. I simply spoke. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it carried. Because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was grounded. Certain. Final. The attorney held my gaze for a moment longer. Then he stepped back. No further questions. I stepped down from the stand, slowly returning to my seat beside Harold. My heart was beating faster now, but not from fear. From something else. Momentum. The courtroom had shifted. Subtly, but undeniably. Harold leaned slightly toward me. You did exactly what you needed to do, he whispered. I nodded once, because I could feel it too. The balance was changing. Judge Whitaker looked over the documents again, then back at the attorneys. Do you have any additional witnesses? She asked. Ryan's attorney hesitated. Just for a second. No, Your Honor, he said. Harold stood. The defense has one final piece of evidence to present, he said. The room seemed to still. Even the air felt different, because this was the moment we had been waiting for. The moment Harold had carefully held back. The moment that would either confirm everything or change everything. He reached into his briefcase and removed the small recording device. My recording device. This, he said, holding it up slightly, is an audio recording taken in Mrs. Morrison's home. Ryan's head snapped up. Ashley's eyes widened. For the first time, real fear. Your Honor, Harold continued, this recording contains a conversation between the petitioners that directly contradicts their testimony. The room went completely silent. Ryan's attorney stood quickly. Objection. On what grounds? The judge asked sharply. Relevance and overruled, she said. Play the recording. The words landed like a final signal. Harold pressed the button, and just like that, the truth entered the room. Ryan's voice, clear, unfiltered. We need to move faster. Ashley's voice, equally clear. If we wait too long, we lose leverage. Every word, every plan, every intention, laid bare. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to, because I could feel it. The collapse, the unraveling of everything they had built. And for the first time since this all began, they weren't in control anymore. The recording didn't just play, it unfolded, slowly, relentlessly, like a truth that had been waiting far too long to be heard. We need to move faster. Ryan's voice filled the courtroom again, no longer controlled, no longer filtered through careful answers and rehearsed concern. Just him. Real. Unguarded. I watched Judge Whitaker's face. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react outwardly. But her stillness had changed. It was no longer neutral. It was attentive, sharp, listening for more than just words. If we wait too long, we lose leverage. Ashley's voice followed, softer, but no less clear. The word leverage seemed to echo louder this time, because now it wasn't hidden behind legal language. It was exposed for what it truly was. Strategy. Manipulation. The recording continued. We file for guardianship, use the evaluation, her resistance, it all fits. Fits. The same word Ryan had used earlier, under oath. But now the context was undeniable. This wasn't concern. It was construction. A narrative built piece by piece. And then, the house we sell it. A subtle shift moved through the courtroom. Someone in the back shifted in their seat. A quiet breath. A quiet realization. This was no longer about care. It was about assets. And Mom Ashley's voice again. The moment I had heard so many times already, but now in this room it felt different, heavier, final. We move her into assisted living, somewhere decent. Nothing too expensive. Nothing too expensive. Judge Whitaker's pen stopped moving. She looked up, directly at Ryan. For the first time, he didn't look composed. His shoulders had tightened, his jaw clenched. Ashley's face had gone pale, and then, she doesn't have to like it. She just has to be declared incapable of stopping it. Silence, not the quiet kind. The kind that presses down on everything. The kind that leaves no room for interpretation. Harold stopped the recording. No one spoke, not immediately, because there was nothing left to explain. Nothing left to soften. Nothing left to hide. Judge Whitaker leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze moving slowly from Harold to me, and then to Ryan and Ashley. Counsel, she said finally, her voice calm, but unmistakably firm. Would you like to respond? Ryan's attorney stood, but for the first time since the hearing began, he didn't look confident. He looked unsettled. Your Honor, he began, this recording, while concerning, does not necessarily reflect the full context of the situation. Context. The word sounded weak now, almost hollow. These e-statements could be interpreted as Your Honor. He began this recording while concerning does not necessarily reflect the full context of the situation. Context. The word sounded weak now, almost hollow. These statements could be interpreted as frustration, he continued. Family members dealing with a difficult situation may express themselves in ways that declared incapable of stopping it, the judge repeated, her tone cutting cleanly through his explanation. The courtroom stilled again. Are you suggesting, she continued, that this is a statement of frustration? The attorney hesitated. Just for a second. And that second said everything. No, Your Honor, he said carefully. But nothing, she said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it didn't need to be. Because authority doesn't shout, it settles, it directs, it ends things. She turned her attention to Ryan. Mr. Morrison, she said, please stand. Ryan rose slowly. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the controlled tone. Now there was only tension. Do you deny making these statements? She asked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He began. Another pause. I was concerned. Gone was the controlled tone. Now there was only tension. Do you deny making these statements? She asked. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He began. Another pause. I was concerned, he said finally. Concern. Even now. Even after everything. The judge held his gaze. Concern does not explain intent, she said. Her words were precise, measured, and devastating. She shifted her attention to Ashley. Miss Morrison, do you deny participating in this conversation? Ashley shook her head slowly. No, she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. And in that moment, something in her broke. Not dramatically, not visibly to everyone. But I saw it. The realization. The understanding that there was no way out of this narrative anymore. No version they could reshape. No explanation they could polish. The truth had already spoken. And it had done so clearly. Judge Whitaker turned back to Harold. Counsel, she said, is there anything further? Harold stood, his expression calm but steady. Only this, Your Honor, he said. The petitioners have presented a case based on alleged incapacity. However, the evidence clearly demonstrates not only that Mrs. Morrison is capable, but that the petition itself was constructed with intent to remove her autonomy for financial gain. He paused. Letting that settle. This is not a matter of concern, he continued. It is a matter of control. The word landed exactly where it needed to. Judge Whitaker nodded slightly. She looked down at the documents one last time, then back up. Her decision wasn't rushed. It didn't feel reactive. It felt inevitable. Based on the testimony and evidence presented, she began, this court finds no basis for the claim that Mrs. Blake Morrison is incapacitated. Relief didn't come immediately, because I needed to hear the rest. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied. Denied. The word echoed in my chest, but she wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, the court finds sufficient cause to refer this matter for further investigation regarding potential financial misconduct. A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere behind me. But I didn't turn, because I already knew. This wasn't just over. This was turning, in a direction they had never expected. Ryan sat down heavily. Ashley didn't move at all. And for the first time since this all began, they weren't looking at me as someone they could control. They were looking at me as someone they had underestimated. The judge gathered her papers. This hearing is adjourned. They weren't looking at me as someone they could control. They were looking at me as someone they had underestimated. The judge gathered her papers. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel struck. And just like that, everything changed. The courtroom didn't empty all at once. It dissolved, slowly. People stood, gathered their things, whispered to one another. The energy in the room had changed. What had begun as a routine legal hearing had turned into something far more serious. Something people would talk about later. Something people would remember. But I didn't move right away. I stayed seated, still, grounded, because I needed a moment not to process what had happened, but to understand what came next. Blake. Harold's voice brought me back. I turned slightly toward him. You did exactly what you needed to do, he said quietly. I nodded, but my eyes had already moved across the room to Ryan. He was standing now, his attorney speaking to him in a low, urgent tone. But Ryan wasn't listening. He was staring at the floor. Not defeated, not completely, but shaken. Ashley stood beside him, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to hold something together that was already breaking apart. For a brief moment, I saw them differently. Not as opponents, not as threats, but as my children. The same children I had raised, the same ones who used to run into my arms. And that thought hurt, more than anything else that had happened in that courtroom. Because betrayal doesn't erase love. It complicates it, twists it, leaves it sitting somewhere in your chest where you don't quite know what to do with it. Do you want to speak with them? Harold asked softly. I didn't answer right away, because part of me did. Part of me wanted to walk across that room, demand explanations, demand honesty, demand something, anything that sounded like regret. But another part of me knew better. This wasn't that moment, and forcing it wouldn't create it. No, I said finally. Harold nodded once. That's probably wise, he said. Wise, a word I hadn't heard applied to me in a while. Not from them. Not lately. I stood slowly gathering my things, the recording device, the documents, the quiet evidence of everything that had just changed. As I turned to leave, Ryan finally looked up. Our eyes met, and this time he didn't look away. There was something there now. Not conviction, not confidence, something closer to realization. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I walked past him without stopping, without speaking, because silence now was my choice, not theirs. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, warmer, lighter, as if something heavy had been lifted, if not completely, then enough to breathe again. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting the sunlight settle on my face. For weeks, months, maybe I had been living under something invisible, pressure, doubt, a quiet erosion of certainty. And now, that pressure had cracked. Not disappeared, but broken open. Mrs. Morrison! I turned. A man in a suit approached, holding a small notepad. I'm with the local press, he said. Would you be willing to comment on the outcome of the hearing? I hesitated. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I needed to choose the right thing. Carefully, deliberately. Yes, I said. He nodded ready. How do you feel about today's decision? He asked. I took a breath, then answered. I feel heard, I said. Not victorious, not vindicated, just heard. And what would you say to others who may be facing similar situations? He continued. I paused, because that question mattered more. They should trust themselves, I said, even when others try to make them doubt what they know to be true. He nodded, scribbling quickly. Thank you, he said. I gave a small nod and turned away, because there was nothing more I needed to say. Not here, not like this. As I walked toward my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Familiar ones. Mom. Ashley. I stopped, slowly, then turned. She stood a few feet away, her expression uncertain. Vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "Can we talk?" she asked. Ryan stood a little farther back, watching, waiting. This was the moment. The one I had imagined. The one I had thought about in quiet hours. And yet standing there, it felt different. Less dramatic. More real. "What do you want to say?" I asked. Ashley swallowed. I didn't think it would go this far," she said. The words hung in the air. Not an apology, not yet. Just a statement. Ryan stepped forward slightly. "We were trying to help," he said. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. Not just manipulation, not just intent, but something else layered underneath. Justification. They had convinced themselves, built a version of events where they were the responsible ones, the ones doing the hard thing, the necessary thing, even if it meant taking everything from me. "That's not help," I said quietly. Ashley's eyes filled with something, tears maybe. "I know that now," she said. "Now, after the courtroom, after the recording, after the truth had been forced into the open." I took a step closer, not aggressive, not emotional, just present. "Do you understand what you tried to do?" I asked. Ashley nodded slowly. Ryan didn't answer. He just stood there, silent. "Because some truths are harder to admit out loud, especially when they come with consequences. There's going to be an investigation," I continued. "About the finances." Ryan's jaw tightened. "I know," he said. "Do you understand why I asked?" This time he nodded. "Barely." "Yes." Another silence settled between us. But this one wasn't tense. It wasn't filled with strategy or hidden intent. It was honest, uncomfortable, but honest. "I'm not going to fix this for you," I said. Ashley looked up sharply. "I'm not going to make it go away," I continued, "or pretend it didn't happen." Her expression faltered. "I know," she said softly. "But that doesn't mean I want to destroy you, either," I added. Ryan looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted again. Because that wasn't what they had expected, not from the woman they thought they could silence, not from the one they had tried to remove. "What happens now?" Ashley asked. I took a breath, and for the first time I allowed myself to think about that. Not the past, not the courtroom, the future. "You take responsibility," I said, "for whatever comes next." I paused. "And we see what's left after that." Because that was the truth. Not a clean ending, not a perfect resolution, but something real. Something that could either be rebuilt or not. And as I turned and walked away, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until that moment. Justice doesn't always end with punishment. Sometimes it begins with truth. The house felt different when I walked back in. Not because anything had physically changed, but because something inside me had. For weeks, this place had felt like contested ground. Every room carried tension. Every object felt like it might be taken questioned or used against me. Now, it was mine again. Not just legally, but emotionally. I set my keys down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. No arguments, no whispered conversations behind closed doors, no careful watching, just silence. And for the first time in a long time, it felt peaceful. But peace, I was learning, doesn't erase what came before. It simply gives you space to understand it. The phone rang. I didn't rush to answer it. I didn't feel that urgency anymore. When I finally picked it up, Harold's voice came through. "Blake, I wanted to update you," he said. "I was expecting your call," I replied. "I've spoken with the district attorney's office," he continued. "They're reviewing the financial documents we submitted." I leaned lightly against the counter, and I asked, "There's enough there to open a formal investigation," he said. The words landed quietly. Not with shock, not with fear, just confirmation. "They'll likely begin by auditing the accounts," he continued, "tracing the transfers, verifying signatures." "And Ryan and Ashley?" I asked. "They'll be contacted," he said. "Soon." I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of relief, not out of satisfaction, just acknowledgement. This was real now, no longer a family dispute, no longer something that could be dismissed or explained away. This was accountability. "Thank you, Harold," I said. "You did the hard part," he replied. "Now we let the process do the rest." After I hung up, I stayed where I was, because even though everything was moving forward, something inside me had slowed down. I wasn't rushing toward an outcome anymore. I wasn't chasing validation. I had already been heard, and that changed everything. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the living room standing in front of the old photo shelf. Thomas's picture sat in the center, the same one that had always been there. Him smiling relaxed the way he always looked when he thought no one was watching. I picked it up carefully. "You would have seen this coming," I murmured. He always had a way of noticing things early. Patterns, shifts in people, small changes that others ignored. And maybe, if he had been here, things wouldn't have gone this far. Or maybe they would have. Because sometimes people don't change because of circumstances. They change because of choices. And Ryan and Ashley had made theirs. I set the photo back down, gently, respectfully, because this wasn't about living in what could have been. It was about facing what was. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. I already knew who it was. I didn't need to look. When I opened it, Ryan stood there, alone. No attorney, no Ashley, just him. His shoulders looked heavier, not physically but emotionally, as if something had settled on him that he couldn't shake. "Can I come in?" he asked. I studied him for a moment. Not as a mother, not as someone trying to protect or excuse, but as someone deciding whether to allow a conversation. "Yes," I said finally. He stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning the room as if seeing it differently, as if realizing something he hadn't before. We moved to the kitchen, the same place where so many conversations had once felt normal. Now it felt like neutral ground. "I go to your call," he said. "I assumed you would." We moved to the kitchen, the same place where so many conversations had once felt normal. Now it felt like neutral ground. "I got a call," he said. "I assumed you would," I replied. He nodded once, his jaw tightening slightly. "They're investigating everything," he said. "Yes." There was no point softening it, no point pretending otherwise. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," he said. I didn't respond immediately, because I had heard that kind of sentence before. Different words, same meaning, intent without accountability. What was it supposed to be, I asked. He looked at me, really looked this time. We thought, 'cause I had heard that kind of sentence before. Different words, same meaning. Intent without accountability. What was it supposed to be, I asked. He looked at me, really looked this time. We thought, he hesitated, searching for the right words. We thought you weren't handling things anymore. No, I said calmly. You told yourselves that. He flinched slightly, because there's a difference, a quiet but important one, between believing something is true and choosing to make it true. We didn't think you'd fight it, he admitted. There it was, the assumption, the expectation. Silence. I know, I said. The room fell quiet again, but this silence wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of us had said yet. You recorded us, he said after a moment. Yes. Why? He asked. The question wasn't accusatory. It was genuine, and that mattered. Because something didn't feel right, I said, and I needed to know the truth. He nodded slowly. And now you do, he said. Yes. He looked down at his hands. I don't know how to fix this, he said. I believed him, because this wasn't something that could be fixed quickly, or easily, or completely. You don't, I said. He looked up, confused. You don't fix it, I continued. You face it, the investigation, the consequences, the truth of what had been done, and whatever came after. He swallowed hard. Are you going to testify against us? He asked. I held his gaze. Yes, I said. There was no hesitation, no apology in my voice, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. He nodded slowly. I understand. I held his gaze. Yes, I said. There was no hesitation, no apology in my voice, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. He nodded slowly. I understand, he said, and for the first time since this all began, I believed him. Not because he said the right thing, but because he had finally stopped trying to control the outcome. I'm not your enemy, Ryan, I said quietly. He looked up again. But I'm not your shield anymore either. The words settled between us. Clear, final, necessary, because that was the real shift. Not the courtroom, not the recording, not even the investigation. Recording, not even the investigation. It was this. The moment when I stopped protecting the version of them that no longer existed and started standing in the truth of who they had become. Ryan N. nodded again, slower this time. I get it was this. The moment when I stopped protecting the version of them that no longer existed and started standing in the truth of who they had become. Ryan nodded again, slower this time. I get it, he said. And maybe he did. Or maybe he was just beginning to. Either way, that was where it had to start. The investigation didn't take long to begin. In fact, it started faster than I expected. 3 days after Ryan came to my house, 2 investigators contacted me. They were professional, direct, and surprisingly respectful, not just of the situation, but of me. That alone told me something important. They didn't see me as a confused woman. They saw me as a credible witness. We sat at my kitchen table, the same place where Ashley had once tried to convince me to give up control. And this time the conversation was entirely different. Structured, clear, grounded in facts. Mrs. Morrison, one of them said, opening a folder, we're going to walk through several transactions and documents. We just need you to confirm whether you authorize them. Yes, I said, and we began. Page by page, signature by signature. transaction by transaction. Each time, I answered calmly, "No, I did not authorize that. No, that is not my signature. No, I was not aware of that transfer." The repetition didn't feel exhausting. It felt clarifying, because every no wasn't just a denial. It was a restoration, a reclaiming of something that had been quietly taken. The investigators didn't interrupt. They didn't challenge. They simply documented. Carefully, precisely. By the end of the meeting, one of them closed the folder and looked at me. "This is sufficient to proceed," he said. Proceed. Forward, toward something real, toward consequences. "Will there be charges?" I asked. He hesitated, just slightly. "That will depend on the full scope of what we uncover," he said. "But based on what we've seen so far, it's a strong possibility." I nodded. Not because I wanted that outcome, but because I understood it. This was no longer about emotion. It was about accountability. After they left, the house felt quiet again. But not empty. Not heavy. Just still. The kind of stillness that comes after something irreversible has already begun. Later that afternoon, Ashley came by. She didn't knock right away. I saw her through the window, standing on the porch, hesitating. That hesitation told me more than anything. Hesitation told me more than anything, as he might say. She wasn't sure if she still belonged here, and maybe she didn't. I opened the door anyway. She looked up, startled for a second. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he might say. She wasn't sure if she still belonged here, and maybe she didn't. I opened the door anyway. She looked up, startled for a second. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," I replied. She stepped inside slowly, as if crossing into unfamiliar ground. "I heard about the investigation," she said. "I assumed you would," I replied. She nodded, her hands clasped tightly together again. That same nervous habit. Only now, it wasn't hidden behind confidence. It was exposed. Real. "They came to see me too." She nodded, her hands clasped tightly together again. That same nervous habit. Only now, it wasn't hidden behind confidence. It was exposed. Real. "They came to see me too," she said. I didn't respond, because there was nothing to add. "They asked about the documents," she continued, "the signatures." I watched her carefully, and I asked. Her eyes filled, but this time, the emotion didn't feel practiced. "I told them the truth," she said. The words landed quietly. But they mattered, because truth at this stage wasn't easy. Not for her. Not anymore. "What is the truth?" I asked. She swallowed. "I signed some of them." She admitted. "Ryan said it was necessary, that you would agree if you understood." If I understood. The familiar justification. The same one that had carried them this far. "And did you believe that I asked?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No," she said softly. There it was. Not a dramatic confession. Not a breakdown. Just honesty. Finally. "I knew it wasn't right," she added. "But I told myself it was temporary, that we were helping." Helping. That word again. Only now it sounded different. Empty. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said quickly. "I just didn't want you to hear it from someone else." I studied her face. The same daughter I had raised, but also someone else. Someone shaped by choices she couldn't undo. "I already knew," I said. She nodded. "I figured you did." she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. The kind of silence where nothing needs to be hidden anymore. What happens now? She asked. It was the same question she had asked outside the courthouse. But this time, it felt different, less uncertain, more grounded. You tell the truth, I said, every time you're asked. She nodded immediately. I will, and you accept whatever comes from that. I continued. Her shoulders dropped slightly. I understand, she said. I believed her, not because she said the right thing, but because she no longer sounded like she was trying to control the outcome. She was just facing it. That was new, and it mattered. I never wanted to hurt you, she said after a moment. I held her gaze. I know, I replied, and I meant it. Because intention doesn't erase impact, but it does explain something. And sometimes explanation is the first step toward understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. She nodded, her eyes lowering. I'll go, she said quietly. I didn't stop her, because this wasn't a moment that needed to be stretched or forced into something it wasn't. She walked to the door, paused, then turned back. I'm sorry, she said. This time it sounded real, not rehearsed, not strategic, just human. I didn't answer, not because I didn't hear her, but because some words need time before they can be met with others. She left, and once again, the house was quiet. But this time, it felt different. Not just peaceful, not just still, complete. Because everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to begin had already begun. And for the first time since all of this started, I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. I was simply moving forward on my terms. The months that followed didn't unfold dramatically. There were no sudden confessions in crowded rooms, no last-minute revelations that changed everything overnight. Instead, it was slower than that, quieter, more real. The investigation moved forward exactly as Harold had predicted, methodical, precise, and indifferent to emotion. Bank records were traced, signatures were analyzed, timelines were reconstructed. Piece by piece, the truth wasn't just revealed, it was documented, and that made it impossible to ignore. Ryan and Ashley both hired separate attorneys. I heard that through Harold, not from them. That too told me something. They were no longer standing together the way they had before. Pressure has a way of doing that. It exposes what unity is built on. And theirs hadn't been built on truth. I wasn't required to appear in court again immediately, but I did provide additional statements. Each time I spoke clearly, consistently, without anger, because anger wasn't what this needed. Clarity was, and clarity, I had learned, was far more powerful. Weeks turned into months. Summer shifted slowly toward fall. The maple tree outside my window began to change its leaves, turning shades of amber and gold, reminding me that transformation doesn't always happen all at once. Sometimes it's gradual, sometimes it's quiet, but it's still real. One afternoon, Harold called. It's done, he said. I knew what he meant. What's the outcome? I asked. Charges were filed, he said. Forgery, financial exploitation. The district attorney pursued it based on the evidence. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not out of relief, not out of satisfaction, just acknowledgement. And I asked. There was a plea agreement, he continued. Both Ryan and Ashley accepted it. I leaned back in my chair. What does that mean? I asked. It means they admitted wrongdoing, he said. Restitution, probation, and permanent records. Permanent. That word lingered. Because some consequences don't fade. They stay. They shape what comes next. Will there be jail time? I asked quietly. No, he said. Given the circumstances, the court opted for a non-custodial sentence. I nodded slowly. Part of me had expected that. Part of me was grateful for it. Not because they didn't deserve consequences, but because consequences come in many forms, and sometimes living with what you've done is the heavier one. Thank you, Harold, I said. You stood your ground, he replied. That's what made this possible. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time, not thinking, not analyzing, just sitting, because this wasn't a moment that needed to be rushed. This wasn't an ending that needed to be celebrated. It was something else, something quieter, something deeper. Closure. Not the kind you see in movies, not the kind that ties everything into a perfect resolution, but the kind that settles into your bones, the kind that says, this chapter is complete. A few days later, I received a letter, handwritten, Ashley's. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Some things don't change. I opened it slowly, carefully. Mom, I don't know how to write this in a way that makes anything better. I don't think that's possible anymore, but I needed to say something honestly, for once. What we did wasn't just wrong, it was selfish, and I can see that now in a way I couldn't before. I told myself we were helping, that we were protecting you, but the truth is, we were protecting what we thought we deserved. And that's something I have to live with. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a response. But I wanted you to know, I see it now. Ashley. I read it twice. Then I folded it back carefully and placed it on the table. No dramatic reaction. No tears. Just recognition. Because understanding when it comes too late still matters. Even if it doesn't fix anything. Ryan didn't write. Not then, not yet. And I didn't chase that. Because healing doesn't follow a schedule. And it doesn't happen on demand. What matters is that it begins. And for me, it had. Life didn't return to what it was before. It couldn't. Too much had changed. Too much had been revealed, but something new began to take its place, something steadier, stronger, more intentional. I started small, reconnecting with old friends I had drifted away from, spending time outside, not just walking, but noticing, really noticing, the way the light filtered through the trees. The way the air felt different in the morning than it did in the evening. The way silence could feel comforting instead of heavy. I also made changes, practical ones. I updated my will, reorganized my finances, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Because control, I had learned, isn't something you assume. It's something you protect. And one evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Ryan, not at Ashley, not even at what had happened. Because anger requires something to hold on to. And I had let go. Not of the truth, not of what they did, but of the weight it carried. Because carrying it any longer would only keep me tied to it. And I wasn't tied anymore. I was free. Free to move forward. Free to define what came next. free to exist without being questioned, doubted, or controlled. And that was something no courtroom could give me. I had given it to myself. The greatest lesson I learned from all of this wasn't about betrayal or even justice. It was about voice. For a long time, I thought silence was strength, that enduring quietly, avoiding conflict, and trusting that things would work themselves out was the right path. But silence can be mistaken. It can be used. It can be turned into something others rely on to take more than they should. And the moment you decide to speak, to stand firm in what you know is true, you change everything. Not just the outcome, but yourself. This story isn't just about what my family did. It's about what I allowed and what I finally refused to allow any longer. It's about recognizing that your voice matters, no matter your age, no matter your situation. And it's about understanding that protecting your dignity is not selfish. It's necessary. If you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or pushed into silence, I want you to know something. You are not alone. And more importantly, you are not powerless. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the most important. Speak, stand, hold your ground, because truth has a way of finding its way to the surface. And when it does, it changes everything. If this story resonated with you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to stand up for yourself even when it felt impossible? Share your experience in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, let me know where and what time it is. Always find comfort in knowing we're all connected in different places. If you believe in stories that remind us of strength, truth, and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe. There's so much more to share. Thank you for being here.